And the man is responsible over his family, and he shall be questioned. And the woman, she is responsible over the household of her husband, and she shall be questioned. So each, as you can see in these levels of responsibility, each has their own responsibility. So the ruler is responsible, the man is responsible, and the woman, she has responsibility also. But as for the man, then he is the head of the household. And he needs to take responsibility of his home. But that can only be achieved if he has wisdom that comes from understanding the Kitab and the Sunnah. That even if his knowledge is lacking, that he knows who to ask. That he doesn't make decisions independently and then ends up regretting them. So just as the ruler is responsible for his subjects, the man is responsible over his wife and children and his home. And this is, as Al-Qasimi said, due to two reasons. Due to the nature which Allah gave them. Meaning each of them has a nature. And there is no denying, my brothers and sisters, my sisters especially, there is no denying that regardless of where you live, which era you live in, which generation you live in, that the nature of man and woman is different. The physiology is different. The body is different. How the body behaves is different. Emotionally they're different. How they see things, they're different. So there is a side to a woman that a man does not have in general. And there is a side to men that a woman does not have in general. And then there are affairs that they cross over in that are similar between both of them. And those are many affairs. But as for the nature of the woman and the nature of the man, then they are distinct characteristics that each one of them possesses. And secondly, due to the role which they carry out. So the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the man his duty and the woman her duty is because each one of them in their nature, in their makeup, in their physiology, in their psychology, in their emotional outlook, that they are different to each other. And each of them, their role is different. And this isn't just the role that you find in the Quran and Sunnah, the role that actually when you look at men throughout the ages and women throughout their ages, that the way that they think, the way that they reason, the way that their outlook is, the way that their physical bodies are, that their roles are different. Of course, a man cannot have a child. Impossible for a man to give birth to a baby. Impossible for a man to breastfeed a child. These are the roles and duties of women. It is the woman that menstruates, not the man. So therefore the woman, in her role which she carries out, it is something that is connected to her physiology, connected to the way that Allah has made her body. So therefore, it is only an ignoramus who will say that the woman, that her duty, her prime duty is not to give birth and to raise children and to cultivate those children from babies. Only an ignoramus would say that. Why? Because her physical body has been made to feed the child. Imagine. You give birth to a child, you don't have to open up a fridge. You don't have to go to the shop. You don't have to go to the marketplace. The food of that child is within the body of the woman. So how can it be said that the duty of nurturing and feeding and raising the baby is not for the mother? She will breastfeed the child for 2 years. She will carry for another 9 months, meaning previous to the 2 years, she will carry that baby in her womb. that a man is not capable of carrying. Allah did not make him for that. So there is something within the innate nature of women that Allah has given to them that the man does not have, that also drives their role. It is a driver of her role because she doesn't have one baby. The only thing that came to prevent her having more than one child or having no children is the invention of the pill. Before that, there was very little to prevent a woman from having a child. So when the contraceptive pill came about, which was invented by the unbelievers so that they could increase in their promiscuity and fornication and immorality, that the woman, that she would get married and she would have children. So in between each of the children, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in most cases, that He prevents her from getting pregnant while she's nurturing and breastfeeding the baby. So every 2 years or every 18 months or so, she would get pregnant again. And this would only last between a certain age limit. And the older she became, the less likely she would be the less likely she is to give birth. And this is also something with which Allah has created her, because as the woman gets older and her body becomes less resilient, then likewise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His mercy and His wisdom, that He makes her less likely to give birth. But when she's young, then she is prolific in childbirth. As she enters the late 30s and the 40s and the 50s in age, then it is less and less likely that she will give birth. So what does that do? That drives the actual role of women. So it is incorrect to assume that you Muslims, that you are the ones who say that the woman should stay in the home and get pregnant and have children and so on. No, that's how she's been created. That is the role of the woman, driven by her physiology, by her nature, by the way that Allah has created her. And as for the man, then the man can continue to have children right up until into his 90s. Because a man can impregnate women. So Allah has created them differently. So therefore, when you look at how Allah has created them, because remember we are talking about the context of marriage here, that whilst the woman is looking after the baby at home 2 years, okay, she's pregnant for 9 months approximately, sometimes more, sometimes less. And then she feeds the child for another 2 years. But after 2 years, what can you do? Leave the child at home and walk out and the child will look after itself? Of course not. The 2 years is just the breastfeeding period, up until the child weans, is weaned onto solid food and can maybe visit the toilet by itself. Then for the progressive years, as the child gets older, the child still cannot look after itself. So the mother is there. So therefore the role of the man is driven, because he knows that while she is looking after and nurturing that child, that I cannot do, I can't feed the child. So what does the man have to do? The man now has to go out. He has to hunt. He has to gather. He has to protect. He has to defend. Because the woman generally and the woman is physically the weaker sex. Does that mean that every woman is weaker than every man? No, there are exceptions to the rule. But in general, Allah created men with a bigger build, with more strength, with greater height, with greater physical abilities. So therefore that drives the man into his role. Do you think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created man and woman in jest? That Allah created them and there's no direction, the very manner in which, or the very way in which Allah created each of the two sexes defines their role. It is not a matter of choice. So, whilst the woman, because if nature takes its course, so the man, he marries a woman, takes her as his wife. So they are married. They have relations. The relations, in most cases, necessitate children. Now, who's going to provide for her while she's feeding the child? Who's going to clothe her? If an attack comes upon a village, which of the two will stand up? You know, think about Middle Ages. Think about ancient times. Think about olden days. People come to attack the village. So where does the man stand and where does the woman stand? Ask yourself the question. Who is the one built to defend against pillage, against attack, against violence, against plunder? Which of the two out of these creations of Allah is built to defend and protect? Man. So who is the one who stays in the hut, stays in the cottage? And who is the one who goes to the edge of the village, which is with his spear and his shield and his sword? Or is it the man that stays at home and he says, okay, today I'll look after the baby. Can you just take the sword and go and fight the enemies? I don't think I'm up for it today. Who is it who does it, my sisters? You know, we are living in times where you are indoctrinated, brainwashed into inverting these natural states with which Allah has created men and women. And all you have to do for a minute is just to take a step back and say, man, that humans have been upon the earth, you know, for an immense period of time. So every time the village or the town or the settlement came under attack by the next village or by a nation, whose bodies and whose roles are such that they are the ones who go out with the sword and the spear to defend and to protect? Is it the men or is it the women? Who are the greater victims of violence? Meaning that who are the ones who stand and die in defense? Is it the men or the women? It is the men. Huge, swathes of men have died in battle over the years in protection of their towns, villages, nations, and so on. Protecting whom? Protecting their wealth, protecting their families, protecting their wives, protecting their children. So this is why when we read these narrations and these tafasir of the scholars, and the scholar says that this is due to two reasons: due to the nature with which Allah has created them with, and due to the role which they carry out. So sometimes we just go ahead and the sister will say, well, I don't really agree with that, because I don't think roles are fixed, and I don't think that nature is like... Because you're not thinking. You're parroting what you learned in the so-called Western liberal socialist environment.